Thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Layover Live. Today we do have a very important topic as we head into hurricane season. We are going to be addressing disaster recovery. As two people who live in the Southeast, hurricanes are something we've always been aware of and something we've prepared for on a personal level. We do have our friends from Explore Asheville and Visit St. Pete-Clearwater to join us in a little bit. Kaylee, I know you lived in St. Pete during Helene. Can you touch on that briefly before we get into the episode?
Yeah. So I've lived in Florida my whole life outside of 2 years when I moved away to DC. But hurricanes were a normal occurrence. We had drills in school, had hurricane days, which we would get the day off of school, and basically have to, shelter in place, or we had to evacuate. I mean, it's no stranger to my upbringing. However, in St. Pete area, we've never actually had a direct hit from a hurricane. So Helene, and we'll probably get into this a little bit in the episode, but Helene caused mass flooding throughout the area. And then we were also hit a couple months later by a second hurricane, Hurricane Milton. So it was kind of compounding damage. Yes, my family and myself are both personally affected. Thankfully we're all healthy and okay, and everything's fine today. But we have a lot of family friends and people in our communities who we know really struggled or lost their homes completely, homes that they built, 30 years ago and lived in their whole lives and raised their children in, that were just wiped out completely. So incredibly devastating to the community. And I know Asheville had tons of similar, casualties and mass destruction of communities. And I think that this episode is focused, around two destinations who have experienced hurricanes and the disaster after that. But I do hope that even if you're in a destination that doesn't get hurricanes, you still have other types of natural disasters that can affect your destination. So I do hope you can still get some great information out of this on how to address communities, how to address your residents and your visitors, and how to come up with a toolkit to help you navigate when these things do happen. Joining us today from actually my hometown's DMO is Kylie Diaz. So Kylie, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, my name is Kylie Diaz, and I am the Vice President of Community Engagement with Visit St. Pete-Clearwater.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know this topic's a little bit heavy, especially as we are entering into hurricane season, but we wanted to speak with you all about how these natural disasters, whether it be, a hurricane, which is what we're mostly used to in the Southeast and on the coast, but also other types of natural disasters like earthquakes, wildfires. We've had a ton of those this year too in Florida. Volcanic eruptions, who knows, all the different natural disasters that can occur, and how the DMO really helps not only to get that message out to those who are visiting our destinations during those times of crisis, but also how we reflect back to our residents and how we're really filling another role as outside of just marketing after those things occur, and how we're kind of helping to rebuild the community and make sure that we're open and ready for visitors in the future. So how do you define a DMO's responsibility when tourism and marketing is no longer the immediate priority, but more kind of prepping for these crisis communications?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. And for just a little bit of background for your listeners who are not familiar with our area, if you rewind back to 2024, we were hit twice in 2 weeks by Hurricane Helene first, which was September 29th, 2024, and then by Hurricane Milton, which was October 9th, 2024. So within 2 weeks of each other. The first storm was more of a water storm, more of a flood storm, and the second storm was more of a windstorm. So we have been trial by fire. We've had to learn on the job there. So how do I define the responsibility when tourism is no longer the immediate priority? For us, that is sort of twofold. So number one, we have a responsibility to our partners and to make sure that the safety of our visitors and guests is in place. So I would say that's number one, because we want to make sure that we are communicating with all of those hotels, especially the ones that are in flood zones, all of that accurate information. I mean, we had been calling around. It was incredible how many people did not know that there was an evacuation order in place for their zones. So that was our number one responsibility, was to our partners. And then number two, we also, we're a public entity. So we have a responsibility to our county that we live in, and we all everyone on our staff actually has assignments. So I was actually assigned to communicate with the partners. Some people have assignments at the Emergency Operations Center. Some people have assignments to the shelter. So we sort of have these dual roles that we have to do both of them along at the same time.
So I came from Destination North Myrtle Beach, which kind of had to mentally prepare for similar disasters. And I know that a lot of DMOs have what they call like a crisis toolkit or a communication toolkit, and they kind of prioritize risk level for that toolkit. What does that look like, and how does that come into play during these events? Do you feel like there's something that's utilized, or do you come back to them after the event and kind of reassess based on what that communication looks like in real time?
So we do have an active plan that we plan for all year long, and we kind of divide the disaster up into three phases. So we've got our pre-phase, our during phase, and then our post-phase. And there's different responsibilities with each of those phases, but the pre-phase is actually the most important. It's where we spend the most time throughout the year. You want to make sure that you have all of your information updated with your partners. So as you know, hotel management changes quite a bit. So you want to make sure that you are reaching out like months before hurricane season to make sure that you have active contacts, active cell phone numbers. I mean, in some cases, if we couldn't get through to people, we were actually texting them. So you want to make sure that you do all of that prep ahead of time. We were also securing POs. We wanted to make sure that we had POs in place. So if we needed to place any rescue workers, staff, any partners, anyone who was displaced by the storm, that we actually could place them in another hotel, and we could do that quickly. So we get those ready ahead of time for hurricane season. And some of these things that I'm talking about actually were updated afterwards, after we learned kind of on the job. So these are some of the things that we're doing now by splitting it into phases.
I mean, Helene was really bad. I lost my car, got completely flooded and totaled. My parents' house got completely flooded, like 8 inches of water. So and I've lived in Florida my whole life from the St. Pete area, and have not really experienced something that bad that I can remember up till 2024. So all this preparation, all these things that you're doing, we don't have a hurricane that touches us for a decade. And then, well, like you said, in 2024, we had those two back to back. And it's hard to, be able to prepare and know what is going to actually impact your destination. And then we kind of find out sometimes 5 minutes before and at least for our these southern destinations that are experiencing hurricanes, we have the weather apps. We have, people who can track that these things are coming and know a little bit ahead of time. And I know that you probably don't have as much experience thinking of something like an earthquake or things that can happen without any warning, but how would you think that this type of playbook and this type of experience that you guys have had, how can that be translated to something that might be a little bit more quick and not so much time to prepare ahead of time?
Yeah, and you make a really good point, because Helene was a storm that was actually off the coast of Florida. We never had a direct hit from Helene, but we were on that, what they call the dirty side of the storm, where it pushed floodwaters up onto our shoreline, and it ended up being, disastrous flooding. And, as a result of that, we did lose 12 lives in our county. So it's something that you have to quickly pivot and be ready to pivot, because, just because the storm was off our coast doesn't mean that it wasn't going to have effects. And so we had to quickly pivot and adapt to that, and to make sure. And that's when having good communication with your partners is key. So, having that lifeline to your partners, and there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. And I think for every destination that it's different, but, whether you're a large DMO with a large budget, or you're a small DMO with a smaller budget, or you don't really have budget for disaster preparedness, have the relationships with your partners. That will save you every time.
I do want to ask quickly, what do you guys have tools that allow you to directly communicate with your partners that you guys used during this, or was it more personal outreach?
So one good line of defense that we have is we're a really large county. So we have 1 million residents in our county. So it's like nearly impossible to reach everyone. Mm-hmm. So we do have our partner strategy that goes sort of to our hotels and restaurants. And one of the key ways that we're able to reach a lot of people quickly is through our chambers. So we do have 13 chambers in our county, and we ask them ahead of time to actually have a disaster page available for people to get information. And so we kind of disperse the information to them, and then they can disperse it to all of their businesses and residents. So it's a really quick way for us to get information out.
So after, these storms or these disasters that happen, how do you, prioritize balancing, the urgency of wanting to go back out and message to tourists, that you're open and we want to bring tourism back, while also kind of acknowledging the impact of things that happened. And like you said, 12 lives were lost. Like that's not something that we want to just gloss over.
Yeah, that's an important question. And it's also, I would say it's a continual balancing act to sort of figure out like that messaging. And so for us, we were, when we're in that, how I said we were in 3 phases, the pre, the during, and the post. So when we were in the during, like our immediate was just to get through and to make sure that everyone was safe. And so when we were in the post phase, we were sort of sitting around and looking at each other. And I think we were all still very fatigued from the hurricane. And we said, what is something that we can do to help right now that is sensitive? And at the time we had our major campaign was called Let's Shine. So we all agreed that we would turn our Let's Shine campaign into Still Shining. And it was really phenomenal because everyone came with ideas to the table. How can we help our partners? How can we be sensitive? And one of the things we did, and it was just such a simple act that we came up with buttons that said Still Shining. And we actually were able, like in a grassroots way, to take these buttons out to our partners and give them to frontline workers just to inspire them. And to this day, people still wear those buttons. So that was like just a really simple way to let the community know that, hey, we're still here, we're still shining, we still have your back. Another thing that we wanted to do was layer in, a lot of these businesses needed help. They needed help. They needed to get people messaging when they were open and their doors were open. And that was actually something that the chambers had really helped us with, was letting us know when these businesses were open. And so they were kind of feeding that to us. We would put videos on social to let people know that we were, kind of back up and running. We did a lot of social pieces. So we kind of just layered in all these different things. We also took some of the billboard placements that we had in the market, and we turned those into letting people know that some businesses were reopened. So from a small business all the way up to some of our larger attractions and hotels to say, hey, we're here, we're open, we're ready to go. So it was a balancing act. And we do have, because we have such a big destination, we have to be really sensitive because some areas recover much quicker than other areas.
I think something we touched on earlier is that we kind of have to switch our hats in moments like this. And so outside of, the toolkit we talked about, what are some other areas that you guys have taken away and implemented steps from this situation to our day-to-day?
So I would say, and we're coming up on hurricane season right now. So one of the things that we're doing with the staff and with the county is we do have a lot of new people on staff. So we're making sure that they're trained properly. As a public entity, we do have government training that we have to do, which is called NIMS courses. So we're making sure that our staff is well trained, that they understand their roles and responsibilities, that they know how to execute in the moment. As I mentioned earlier, making sure all of that information is up to date for all of your your partners and who you can reach out to. We actually just talked about hurricane prep this morning in one of our meetings. So it is continually being brought to the table. We make sure that if we have staff planning vacations, that they're cognizant of it being hurricane season, that we might need them to pivot and stay behind. So it is a continual part of our conversation.
This is my last question, but for a destination or somebody listening who might not have a crisis communication or any type of toolkit, nothing that they've not done anything yet to prepare for these types of events, what would be a bit of advice that you would give them to get started?
One of the things that, as we were speaking back to Hurricane Helene and how surprised we were that we had such bad effects from it, a lot of times you're not expecting these things, and you keep hearing that term like 100-year event, that you're not, it's a 100-year event. We didn't know it was going to happen. We didn't know this flooding. We didn't know this fire. We didn't know this earthquake, whatever it is. And so I think that having a plan for everyone is key. And like I said, it doesn't matter what your budget is. I think that just having a plan, talking to your staff, and making sure that they're ready to activate, because when you're in crisis, the community, they are looking to you for answers, and you need to be prepared with those answers. And so your phones are blowing up. People want to know what's going on. They want messaging. They want to know what's open. They want to know where the shelters are. So just make sure that you're prepared. And if you're a DMO that's not a public entity, make sure that you connect with your city and your county to understand what their plans are, and that you are an advocate for them to get their information out. So it's just very important, and having up-to-date information on everyone is key as well.
I loved what you said earlier about that page just for partners, and surely having that resident forward page too is super important, because to your point, while there are things we can plan for, there are things we cannot. So spreading that awareness of where to find that information is super important. And I know we'll be talking to Asheville in just a little bit as well. And I just appreciate you both coming on to share your stories and share some tips for, other DMOs to create action and prepare. Is there anything else you'd like to leave for the listeners today?
Yes, and that is your community is key. So I can't say that enough. I know I've repeated it several times during this interview, but having your community relationships and your partnerships are key. You are all going to work together in a response. And when you are crippled by a storm or by something else that happens, the key is to just move forward. Just keep moving forward. It's easy to get stuck. So just keep moving forward and relying on each other. And if you don't have the answers, it's easy to rely on each other to try to figure out a solution for the people that need it. And, you, as prepared as you can be, there are things in real time that you're learning and that you're developing, and just keep moving. Just keep going forward.
Thank you. I have one question that's a little bit to kind of get rid of the doom and gloom a little bit, a little more of an upbeat question. What was the place that you were most excited after they reopened post hurricane damage? You're most excited to go back to?
We have a historic hotel called the Don Cesar down in St. Pete Beach. And if you are familiar with this hotel, it's kind of a beacon for St. Pete Beach. It's just this beautiful, large, historic hotel. It's pink. And as soon as you come over the bridge, it's the first thing you see. They were hit very hard because they are a historic hotel. So it took them many, many months to open. And I remember when they opened, it just invigorated everyone. Everyone was so excited. It took them a little bit longer to get back online, and having them as this beacon of hope for some of the other hotels that were still waiting to come back online was just incredible. So that is the place that I am most excited about. And they've also just done a renovation as well. So it's just, again, just one of those places that was a beacon for us in the destination.
Yeah, I love the Don. They have, it's beautiful. And because I'm very into the paranormal, as people who listen to this podcast probably realize by now, it is very haunted because it's very historic. But very great hotel. If anyone listening ever is in St. Pete-Clearwater, highly recommend to check it out.
Thank you. Yeah. And if anybody has any questions in regards to hurricane preparedness or our campaigns that we launched or anything, please let us know. We're happy to answer any of those questions.
And joining us from one of my favorite destinations, Asheville, is just a short drive from me. I always love when I get to go visit. We have Dodie Stevens.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about your role at the DMO to date?
Yes, so I'm the VP of Marketing here at Explore Asheville in and amongst some of the most oldest and ancient mountains in the world. I have worked with Explore Asheville for going on 17 years, not continuously, but I boomerang back because I love this community so much and the work that we do.
It's so beautiful. I highly encourage anyone who hasn't visited yet to give it a visit. There's truly nothing like it. I know that we touched a little bit earlier on the disasters of 2024, so I did kind of want to start there today from your lens at Asheville.
Hurricane Helene for us here in Western North Carolina and for across the region was a generational storm event that struck Asheville and Western North Carolina at the end of September. Now, for us, that is the start of our peak fall travel season, which is the most economically vital time of the year ahead of those slower winter months. The French Broad River, one of the oldest rivers in the world that runs through Asheville, and other tributaries reached this unprecedented flood levels and devastated businesses and creative communities that sit alongside them and historic neighborhoods. It wasn't just a flooding event, it was also a geologic disaster in terms of the way that the water moved through. And for example, one of our most popular attractions, the Blue Ridge Parkway, had 57 landslides. Fortunately for us, the downtown infrastructure of Asheville is largely intact. However, residents and businesses faced compounding hardships. We had a 74% drop in lodging tax revenues, and tourism here is absolutely vital for our community. It's 20% of Buncombe County's GDP. Sitting here 8 months out, you could really feel the tangible momentum in our community, and we're also starting to see that on the data side as well. Our year-over-year travel demand is now pacing ahead, and we're seeing gains week over week through the spring and summer. Throughout our community, we have an airport that's doubling in size, and they just put in their second highest passenger year on record. The Blue Ridge Parkway, America's favorite scenic drive, is open 114 miles north and south of Asheville. We have the PGA Tour coming to Asheville this fall, and that is returning back to our community after 84 years with the Biltmore Championship at Asheville, which is just a huge tentpole and line in the sand declaring the momentum and resilience that our community has maintained as we're working towards this place of rebound.
Yeah, I love the resilience message that you had in there a lot, and that's something that we've touched on in a couple past episodes as well. And despite how horrific that Helene was, it is really beautiful that our industry continues to show that resilience and strength. And it has a lot to do with what our DMOs are doing and what you're doing, Dodie. And that's really important. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about kind of when Helene first started to move up towards North Carolina. Can you kind of walk us through how you were approaching communications, not only to visitors, but to residents, and how you kind of prioritized who to go towards first and how to get messaging out to keep everybody safe?
The way that Hurricane Helene played out for our community was not something that we could anticipate in totality. However, we knew the storm was coming. We'd known about historic effects and major flooding. And so the community was, and we were, taking our normal precautions when it comes to advisories, stakeholder communications, just sort of enacting those, those parts of our crisis plan that are, fairly standard when we have a major storm moving into the area. I think what we, quickly, realized, and it was this, because we were, completely without power for weeks and potable water for even longer, is that we were dealing with something, much different. Even within the community, many, and for some in leadership roles, it was a strategic choice to move outside of the community in order to have the connectivity to get a fuller picture of what was going on. So when you're in that moment and you're in the community, really your first and our first, communications, it's kind of working from the inside out, right? You are taking care of yourself and your family, then your work family, then you are moving over to your stakeholders and community officials, your crisis and community colleagues, and then moving out from there. It is something that feels like it's in those moments just almost happening simultaneously. So a lot of the things that we leaned on in those moments weren't these hard and fast pieces of a crisis plan that you update every couple of years. It really was the more of a framework built on our relationships and the DMO's unique role within the community that allowed us to work very flexibly in that space.
I think the connectivity point is very interesting because we talk about how you can plan to an extent and build your toolkits, but there's always going to be outside factors. Connectivity and being able to send those messages and enact those toolkits can change drastically. So I thought that was a very interesting point, and I appreciate you sharing that. How would you say that your strategic plan and toolkit for these, framework of events has changed from this event? What has been learned that has been enacted today?
So one of the things that we learned during Helene was how much we could apply from previous crises and how we could just use those and build upon those structures in a new way. The small business grant framework that our team has experience with and had experience with going back to pandemic era. The online sales and donation platform that we quickly lifted for our partners, Love Asheville from Afar, that was another play that we built upon and made specific to that current crisis from that pandemic era, marketing toolkit. One of the things I think we learned the importance to going beyond just the regular communication flow with your stakeholders, having meetings, being out in community, just that constant flow of communication that kicked up probably 10, 20, 30 fold, that we also needed to then be providing and following up with toolkits and customizable creative and sample messaging and trainings with partners to help get them what they needed. And also when it made sense to help them align with the milestones that we were, communicating and we need to be communicating together as a community. Another thing that's in your crisis toolkit that I think became so clear for Explore Asheville after something on the scale of Hurricane Helene is just how your relationships and your industry relationships are a part of that toolkit. They're so important within your community, of course, but also without. Like, your industry lifelines will stretch a lot longer than you think when you really need them. Thinking about that in a different way and being prepared to activate that. For us, that looked like our friends in New Orleans, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, offering advice and plans and samples for what they had done. Our state and local partners helped us rally our Western North Carolina community together. Our advertising and our media partners were there for us when we asked for in-kind support to help get our communications messages out to the world time and again. And so it was, a really rewarding position to be in, to be able to, and just the hospitality community, it goes deep, and to be an experience where it's coming back to you in that way, that is very humbling for a community. The first groups that returned to visit Asheville were our values-based conferences and event partners from around the country, and they were the ones telling the world that Asheville was ready for a visit. And with that, we put in our best year ever for conferences and events in the wake of Hurricane Helene.
I love all of that. Thank you. That's just the beauty of our industry, right? And it's just the human connection that we're all pushing with travel, and we're all here for each other. And I always say that the tourism community, the DMO community, it's really small. I mean, it's obviously large. There's lots of us, but it's small at the same time, and everybody kind of knows everyone and is there for each other. So I think that's lovely.
I'd love to touch on what you just talked about in terms of that reopening message. I know being in that shorter drive market, I saw some of that pop up on my feed from a visitor standpoint, and I know you touched on it from a meeting standpoint. How did you guys decide when it was time to, spread that messaging again, and what did that plan look like for you guys?
The DOT is the one, telling travelers when it is safe to move into a community. So that was first and foremost, what we were waiting for, and working with our state partners to make sure there was clarity around that and sharing that with our partners. And beyond that, we are doing the work that we do, arm in arm with our partners. And so when it is time to, move out with that message to return, we were doing that with our partners when they were telling us that they were ready. And so pretty quickly, it's about, a little over a month, we were able to turn our advertising back on. But we went in with a very adapted message tied to where we were. And so that message evolved over time because, recovery is complex. It doesn't look the same across your community. It is not a linear process. And so it really is the weight the communications teams and the DMO has to bear in really finding that balance and striking the right tone. And it's CEOs, said it well, that there are going to be, if there are folks on either end of the spectrum who aren't comfortable with what you're doing, then you're probably almost to where you need to be, right in the middle. And so we started out with a plan a return trip with heart, which really acknowledging that we needed people to come back mindfully into our community. And all of our hub and communications materials helped outline how visitors could do that. We then moved on, and this is really, we're in the data. We're looking and understanding, what our barriers to communication are. We're talking with our partners about what they need. And, one of the things that became very clear was that we needed to directly tell people that we were open. And so we moved to a more direct space pretty quickly where we said, we're open, be part of the comeback, which is kind of building on that momentum, asking our visitors and our friends and family travelers to join us. And from there, the message evolved and getting further and further away from that. One of the things that we learned as we were creating our comeback, comeback strategy was how tricky it is to, get that messaging just right for your visitor, wherever they are in their space of understanding. The world was flooded with millions of visuals, of our crisis. And so for us to track that and create something that was really resonate, we had to think, really had to look really closely at who was coming, who wasn't coming back yet, and who needed what messaging. One of the things that we learned was that your friends and family markets require a lot more investment than you would think. Usually our drive markets, they're coming into our community. We are engaging them once they're, further down the funnel, just make sure they have places to go and converting that way because they're coming. After the storm, we realized we were in their feeds every day with every part of Asheville's recovery story, and many of them were holding back. And so we had to go in much stronger with investment on marketing, with investment in PR, to really build that comfort and invite them directly. So I would say looking at your marketing mix is something that you have to do differently, after a crisis.
I kind of want to go on a different note, and this is the last question that I have for you today, but kind of in the middle, before you are ready to reopen, I want to talk a little bit about the DMO's role in the actual recovery. I heard one of your colleagues mention that you have a partner who does helicopter tours, and they actually were using their helicopters to go in and deliver, supplies to some of those in the mountains or in areas that were impassable. And I think that's amazing that you guys were able to coordinate that, and would love to hear some more about, that specifically, and also any other recovery efforts that you all contributed to.
Yeah, our community, that is, this one of the silver linings of crisis is just watching, what your community is capable of. And a hospitality community really shows up in such a beautiful way. We had our hotel partners using, waters from the pool to, flush toilets. They were opening their doors to, recovery crews and to locals. We, chefs and restaurants were, feeding our communities time and again. Businesses in our community transitioned their operations in order to be sources for relief. So it was very important for us to put structures in place to be able to support them on the comeback and eventually the rebound, which is what we are striving for as a destination marketing organization. We see ourselves as that economic engine for our community, and so while as our city and county colleagues are very much focused on, recovery, we are very much focused on that rebound because we know that our partners need that because of all that they went through, and then all that they sacrificed as that, lifeline to their neighbors. And some of the efforts that we put in place to do that out of the gate, we lifted a campaign called Love Asheville from Afar. This was quick turn support hub that we built off of the pandemic playbook, launched it in under 20 days, and it had over 770 businesses listed with links to buy directly from them, to click through to donate. It was hugely successful, and we had just great media pickup and in-kind advertising through our partners. The Always Asheville grant program was another thing that we leveraged some expertise in-house, and we're marketing and promoting that through a strategy of amplified events. The big engine behind that kicked off with Concert for Carolina. So conversations on that began about a week, within days of the storm, and allowed Explore Asheville to join Luke Combs and Eric Church and others as a presenting sponsor, taking our net media dollars to join and headline that event, which raised $24 million for Western North Carolina relief and came back directly to our community. We then used that strategy of relief events that were amplified in that way to continue to put money into the Always Asheville grant program that went back to our independent businesses and our hospitality businesses, and eventually took that model into bringing an event back to our community to drive business through Stars Serving Up Love, which is a tennis benefit for our community. So that was one of the most creative uses of net media dollars that I've been engaged in with on the marketing side, and to see it come back so literally, and then also serve as a platform for sharing our recovery milestones was really gratifying.
I remember that event, and if I remember correctly, Eric Church now had a song that you guys used for your promotional videos. Did it stem from that connection there?
It did. And we were able to partner with Eric Church on leveraging the Carolina, his siren song for our state and our community as our one of our big campaign pushes, asking visitors to return to our community.
That's beautiful. I think the theme of today's episode has been, resilience, but beyond that, it's been hope and community that comes out of disaster. Is there anything that you would like to share for our listeners? We truly appreciate you coming to share your story and spotlight that.
Being in that and walking away, and we're still in it. Even a year and 8 months, we are still in it. We're still working towards that rebound for our community. But looking back on all that we accomplished, we realized that we can only do the kind of work that we've done and build the kind of momentum as quickly as we have alongside our neighbors. And really happy to say that a point of pride for us this year was getting our resident sentiment survey back, the second one. And 95% of our residents here in the community believe that tourism benefits our community, and 9 in 10 are proud to call this place home. And I think that is just a testament to coming out of these hardships just stronger.
That's beautiful. I feel like that's hard to resident sentiment to be that high around tourism. Like, that's beautiful.
Yeah, we expected a bump after the storm, really, because we'd been in it together, working together. But to see that sustain over a year later is, I think, a testament to the ways that this has created new foundations and new pathways, across the Asheville area, and how we're working together more closely and differently than we have before.
I'm so glad that we got to have a space to spotlight these stories and learn more from these two destinations. Kaylee, I know this was a personal episode for you. Any closing thoughts for our listeners here?
Yeah, it definitely was really emotional for me, both, when it happened and now, even today, talking about it again. But I do think there is a lot of positivity and light that can be taken out of this episode, as well as, heavy of a topic that it can be. And I just think that, even in the hardest times, our communities band together, our partners band together, and we just keep pushing forward and making the most of what we can do. Natural disasters are always going to happen. It's just the environment that we live in, and a lot of it is out of our control. So, just having those toolkits, having those relationships, I think it's a really great message to just continue to strengthen your relationships within your community so that you can be the trusted voice for when these things do happen.
Our community is resilient and welcoming. And with that, we're very lucky to have a space to be able to share that. We look forward to sharing more stories with you guys. I know we're going to be talking more on that community element in the future. So as always, thank you so much for giving your time. And we can't wait to share your story too soon. Feel free to give us a follow. Let us know what you think and share your stories as well. Thank you so much.